In Dawn of the Dead, the apocalypse arrives quickly and unexpectedly. However, the movie does not tell the whole story. Those who own the original DVD will remember that it included very important additional material, a fictional news broadcast that documents, almost in real time, how the situation with the living dead progressively deteriorates. Everything begins with isolated disturbances interpreted as racial violence, then moves through denial and collective hysteria until it culminates in absolute chaos and the fall of governments around the world. That same DVD also included another very interesting piece of material showing Andy's video in the gun shop, where we see how his personal situation slowly falls apart until the fate we already know from the film. But that story will be saved for another video. Taking the first moment of the additional material as a reference, what we could call Hour Zero, the regular programming is abruptly interrupted and replaced by an emergency news broadcast. The visibly tense anchor informs us that his colleague is not present, and that what was recently described as isolated disturbances in Madison no longer fits any normal explanation. What was initially presented as a local problem, even as a racially motivated conflict or a wave of mass hysteria, quickly begins to turn into something else. It becomes clear that the violence is not contained within a single city, does not fit any everyday pattern, and is already spreading across multiple points of the country, while the number of injured people rises at a pace that is impossible to hide. The presenter, David, speaks not of dozens or hundreds but thousands of injured people. The broadcast then shifts to St. Augustine Memorial Hospital. Catherine Lamphere's report describes a scene that suggests an imminent collapse. Overwhelmed emergency rooms, doctors unable to keep up with the endless flow of patients, all showing the same pattern. The injuries are not caused by gunshots or stabbings. They are direct physical attacks, bites, deep scratches, missing fingers, throats torn apart as if by a wild animal. Dr. James Shadid offers no comforting answers. He explains that infections appear immediately, patients go into toxic shock within hours, and the staff can barely keep pace. Amid the chaos, a patient's testimony summarizes the mistake many people make during the first hours of the zombie outbreak. They see someone who looks injured or disoriented, assume they need help, approach them, and are attacked. This is natural when no one understands what is happening, and it only accelerates the spread of the infection. Back in the studio, the anchor lists possible explanations for the crisis: environmental contamination, chemical weapons, terrorism, even a virus of extraterrestrial origin. The only certainty is the total absence of an official explanation. Although federal agencies mobilize, authorities urge people to remain calm and stay at home. The message sounds almost ironic, as the situation has already surpassed any government protocol. From this point on, the broadcast begins counting the hours since the start of the chaos, beginning at hour 3. Before each new segment, maps of the country appear covered in red dots, showing the different outbreak zones. Each dot represents an active hotspot, and with every update, they multiply. The disconnection between political power and the severity of the situation is sealed by an official statement recorded hours earlier. From the White House, citizens are assured that this is not an intentional attack and that the situation will be contained within a day. In retrospect, the statement is not only false but revealing. It shows that while the world was already collapsing, the structures of control were still clinging to the idea that everything could be solved through official statements, something that feels all too familiar in real life. Inevitably, the breaking point arrives when the news channel decides to air an unfiltered recording due to urgency. It is homemade footage showing young people who do not understand what they are dealing with. In the video, they joke and laugh as they push one of their friends to approach a disoriented woman trapped in what appears to be a basement. Amid laughter and mockery, they encourage him to do something with her, but the infected woman quickly overpowers him and begins to devour him. The studio cuts the transmission too late. The anchor tries to recover and offers hurried apologies, making it clear the footage should never have aired. But by then, it no longer matters. The most disturbing part is not just the violence of the attack, but what it reveals about people's mindset at the time. No one in the video shows real fear. They do not understand this is not normal. It is a public health threat. At the same time, massive power outages are reported in Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, where at least 10 million people have been left without heating or electricity. By hour 10 of the outbreak, we see David incredulously interviewing a supposed author named Dr. Wesley Collar, who claims that all of this is psychological and that the spreading infection is due to the mouths of people with poor hygiene containing thousands of pathogens that are causing the infection. This so-called specialist further suggests that what is happening is not a virus or an external agent, but a collective emotional reaction, a release of accumulated violence from a society under constant pressure. This explanation is not only insufficient, but almost offensive in light of the images already shown. Fortunately, it does not go on for long, as the conversation is interrupted to present much more urgent information. David reports that Istanbul and New Delhi are experiencing sporadic outbreaks of violence, very similar to those seen in the United States. Suddenly, the signal switches to the United Kingdom, specifically West London, where a BBC correspondent is reporting through an unstable transmission without even knowing whether anyone can hear him. He explains that the city has already fallen to the outbreak and that communications are limited. As he speaks, a woman and her son appear running, and he tells them to run as well, followed by the screams of a horde of zombies chasing them. The reporters begin to run, and the transmission cuts out. There is no longer any doubt. What was believed to have started as a domestic crisis in the United States has already crossed land and maritime borders on every continent. It is confirmed that this is no longer merely an American problem. It is simultaneous and global. In the scrolling information at the bottom of the screen, desperate measures are announced in other continents. Australia, for example, declares a total quarantine, and flights are diverted or canceled. By hour 15, more than half the country is reporting outbreaks. In New York, all bridges and tunnels leading into Manhattan are being destroyed, and the Coast Guard has barricaded the entire perimeter around the island. It is unclear whether this measure is meant to prevent people from entering or from leaving. Near the midpoint of the first day, the official language becomes more brutal. Local authorities recommend that the population organize itself to contain the threat and form cleanup squads. In Monroeville, outside Pittsburgh, the images accompanying this message leave no room for interpretation. Armed civilians are already patrolling the streets, shooting and burning the infected. The same scenes later appear inside the shopping mall, seen by the survivors. Something interesting shown here are the so-called twitchers, zombies who are wounded and suffer spasms. In many cases, it is difficult to determine whether they are truly dead, because some remain still but with periodic spasms. A crucial piece of information about the infected comes from the Hammond County Medical Examiner's office. In the morgue, Dr. Richards Quatermass examines a body and puts into words what had only been suspected until that moment. The first thing he states is that no infected person has survived the infection, that the reanimated have no vital signs and no normal organic activity. The bodies are completely dead, yet they continue moving for reasons not yet fully understood, even when internal organs have been removed. The doctor also confirms that all cases follow the same pattern: contact with fluids, entry through open wounds, systemic collapse, death, and return with violence. The time varies depending on the severity of the injury, but the result is always the same, without exception. In a moment of carelessness, one of the assistants is attacked by the zombie that had been immobilized on the table, and the image cuts abruptly. By hour 17 of the outbreak, the CDC finally provides official information about what is happening and confirms nationwide that the infected are clinically dead. They also explain the methods of transmission through bites and fluids and make it clear that reanimation occurs no more than 5 minutes after the infected person dies, returning with immediate homicidal aggression. By hour 19 of the crisis, no state in the country remains free of infection. Los Angeles is under siege by hordes of the dead, and the military has closed all access roads. The Los Angeles police have abandoned downtown and are attempting to form a perimeter around Beverly Hills. The reporter urges the population to avoid Los Angeles at all costs, as the city is lost. In the middle of the chaos, the broadcast cuts off and shifts to a more serious tone. Programming switches to an official conference from Washington to speak directly to the public. The statement is clear: the country is entering a state of emergency. Martial law is activated. A mandatory curfew is imposed. Anyone remaining in public spaces will be detained immediately. Police, firefighters, and emergency personnel are federalized, and the armed forces and National Guard are fully mobilized. The borders with Canada and Mexico are sealed. Civil communications are restricted, and the use of lethal force is authorized against those who take advantage of the chaos to loot. It is also reported that the Vatican has issued an official statement about the religious implications of the phenomenon, and mass self-terminations are reported in the Middle East. At this point, the language of politicians no longer attempts to reassure the public, nor do they promise solutions. The government has shifted into containment mode and will attempt to maintain some form of order. This is in essence confirmation to the public that the situation has surpassed any planned protocol. In the studio, the presenter begins to lose composure, and his concern becomes visible through his body language. By the time coverage reaches hour 20 since the first reports, estimated deaths exceed 10 million according to preliminary calculations in the United States alone. Even so, David admits these numbers are probably an underestimate. On a global scale, the situation is even more uncertain due to the collapse of communications, the loss of international coordination, and the fragmentation of command structures. The problem is no longer just the number of deaths, but the speed at which everything is happening. In less than 24 hours, the world went from trying to understand the strange phenomenon to facing total systemic collapse. And by this point, it was already too late. When the chaos can no longer be disguised, the news program tries to offer something practical and obtains a training video, apparently used by response forces, and broadcasts it as an urgent guide for the public. Here we can observe armed personnel confronting one of these reanimated bodies under controlled conditions. They explain that shots to the legs only slow them down, and hits to the chest knock them down for seconds, giving time to neutralize them completely with a precise shot to the head. They also explain defensive positions when attacked from multiple directions, and remind the public that the numerical advantage is always on the side of the zombies, no matter how much ammunition you have. By hour 26 of the outbreak, David reports with concern that reliable sources have informed him that in China, Shanghai, and Hong Kong have been completely destroyed by nuclear explosions. Places that only hours earlier represented financial and cultural centers are now reduced to erased points on the map. It is not explained who made the decision, whether it was China attempting to contain the massive hordes of the dead or Russia trying to prevent zombies from spreading toward them. It is also unknown whether these were isolated cases or if this happened in more countries. After this confirmation, the coverage enters its final phase. David announces that the signal will be transferred to the National Emergency Broadcast System. There are no more live reports, international links, or analysis to present. What remains is only basic communication. The studio has exhausted everything it could offer. As a final report, the presenter informs viewers that the president has moved to a secure bunker with his cabinet, although this has not been confirmed. He then plays what may be the president's final message to the public, a short but hopeful speech calling for unity, speaking of resistance, future reconstruction, and a new dawn after the darkness. More than a policy announcement, it sounds like a letter addressed to those still listening. With nothing left to report, David stops acting as a news anchor and speaks as someone who understands that what comes next cannot be narrated from a studio. He looks directly into the camera and tells his wife he will be home soon, that she should get the children ready and wait. After this, he leaves the studio. What happens next is uncertain. We do not know if he makes it, nor what he finds when he arrives. In that moment, he stops being a news presenter and becomes a man facing the same fate as everyone else. Although the film never confirms David's fate, his disappearance opens the door to several theories that complement what we saw in the news broadcast and expand the tragedy that occurred before Anna woke up from the accident. The most solid and tone-consistent theory is that David died trying to return home. By the time he ends the broadcast, the collapse is already irreversible. The death toll is counted in the millions. Martial law has proven insufficient, and major cities are losing control. Leaving the studio at that point would not simply have been risky, it would have been almost a death sentence. Traffic would have been paralyzed, the streets infested, and security forces overwhelmed. In that context, the chances of a civilian crossing the city without encountering a horde would have been extremely low. This theory also fits the film's brutal message. Humanity lost far too quickly for happy endings to exist. A second possibility is even more tragic, that David actually made it home, reunited with his wife, gathered his children, and waited together for the end. But in this universe, that guarantees nothing. If the outbreak was already active across the entire country, it is likely his neighborhood was overrun as well. In that scenario, his end would not have been in the streets, but inside his own home, a more intimate ending, but just as plausible. The third theory, the least explored, suggests that David never managed to leave the building. During the final minutes of the broadcast, the studio already showed signs of internal chaos. Hospitals and government offices stopped being safe almost immediately, and a news building would not have been any different. Additionally, these studios are usually located in central areas surrounded by dense urban populations. In an outbreak that collapsed cities within hours, it would not be surprising if the building was compromised before David even managed to leave. The final theory relates to the military collapse and the nuclear detonations in China that are mentioned. If some cities were destroyed as a desperate containment measure, it is possible David was in an area later considered lost and strategically eliminated. This reinforces the idea that the government not only lost control, but chose to sacrifice entire territories when restoring order became impossible. Something also seen in other stories such as World War Z or The Walking Dead. But beyond which theory is correct, what matters is what David did as a person. He remained at his job until the very end, trying to help people in his own way, and his fate does not need explicit confirmation. In the universe of Dawn of the Dead, the absence of answers is part of the horror. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my new videos. I also want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thanks to you and all of our viewers, we can keep diving into these kinds of disturbing and thought-provoking stories. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, early videos, and other perks, I invite you to become a member. Just click the join button below this video. See you in the next one. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.